Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to this Escalla webinar about procuring apprenticeship training. Hopefully this afternoon is going to help you to avoid some of the pitfalls that you might encounter along the way. Little bit of housekeeping. You'll see a panel on the right hand side. There's some icons on that panel. Talk you through what they will allow you to do today. There is a chat box. Please feel free to enter any questions you might have into this chat box at any time. If we don't pick it up while we're talking, we will pick them up at the end. Anything we can't answer, we will get back to you at the end of the webinar. You will be muted, so we won't be able to hear anybody. We have got a panel with us today, so we'll be able to hear them speaking. The webcam is not on. The slides can be downloaded throughout the webinar. They're in the panel on the right-hand side. And there are some polls today. We're taking 2 polls. It'd be lovely for you to get involved. The results are recorded anonymously, so we'll just see the number of responses for each question. We won't see who's actually responded. So if I'm going to take a second just to introduce ourselves. So I'm Emma Saventi. I work for Escalla. I'm the Academy Coordinator based in Cheshire. I've been in education now for nearly 20 years across primary, secondary and further and higher education. I've been with Escalla for the last 3 years, concentrating with apprenticeships. And we've got 2 other people with us today. Julie unfortunately cannot make the webinar. She's had a family emergency. So I will cover Julie's content, so we won't be missing anything out today. We'll cover everything that we've planned to cover. Can I introduce Paul to the webinar? Hello, Paul.
Hello, my name is Paul Smith. I'm the apprenticeship lead for a large employer with a significant apprenticeship levy that I like to spend effectively. I'm also a National Apprenticeship Ambassador for England, and I'm chair of an FE college. And I've been in apprenticeships since 2008, and my first venture into that was developing the first creative apprenticeship programme for England as part of Liverpool City of Culture, long before the word trailblazer came to life.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. Hello, Jack.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jack Denton. I'm the co-founder of the All About Group, and we run a series of websites to help provide information and guidance to young people and work closely with around about 200 employers to help them reach those people. And we conduct a large piece of research into the market. It's the largest piece of research into the early careers space, with more than 40,000 respondents. It's a 6-year longitudinal study, which gives us a really good overview of what employers face, the challenges they face, and the difficulties they find, especially when trying to work with providers.
Thank you, Jack. That's brilliant. So on to today's agenda. We're going to, first we'll have a bit of a quick introduction. We're going to look at employer-led apprenticeship standards, the select committee report, what to look out for when procuring apprenticeship training, price versus quality and why Ofsted matters, and how to safeguard your levy, apprentices and programmes. So the webinar today is to help you with procuring apprenticeship training. We are aiming to dispel some of the myths around training and your levy funding so you can decide what's important. As you may already know, employers' digital funds will start to expire from April next year. And this means that some of our local authorities will end up losing their levy funds if they don't start to use them now. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later on. As well as that, there are a number of new apprenticeship standards which are being developed, meaning there's lots more choice out there for local authorities and hopefully more take-up of apprenticeships. Many of you will be here today because of the new Revenues and Welfare Benefits Apprenticeship Standard. So you might be a Revenue and Benefits Manager, thinking of putting some of your staff through the apprenticeship, or you could well be an Apprenticeship Levy Manager or Procurement Manager. Either way, you'll be involved in decision making around your apprenticeship programme requirements. Whatever you are sort of likely to do in the formal process, this webinar will hopefully help you out with that today. We've got an expert panel with the 2 gentlemen involved. So any questions that you've got, please feel free to ask them. We will break this webinar down, hopefully, so that it makes sense. If you're not picking something up, just type us a question and we'll get back to you. This webinar is looking at sort of getting the most from your levy, looking at cost versus quality, and what quality factors you need to look out for along the way. I'm going to introduce the first poll now. So the poll question will appear on your screen with a selection of answers. The first question is, when choosing an apprenticeship provider, do you believe that quality or price is the most important factor? If you'd like to make your selections now. That's fantastic. So the poll results should be showing on your screen. That's fantastic. We'll look at this further later and we'll discuss your responses. Thank you for answering that poll. And then we're going to just ask one more poll question now. So poll question 2 is, how important is the training provider's Ofsted rating to you when you're selecting your training provider? If you could make your selections now, that would be fantastic. Thank you very much. Paul, Jack, is that surprising where you think it would be? That the majority is very important?
That doesn't surprise me, because I think the emphasis and the coverage with Ofsted relevance is really high. However, I would quantify that, because especially with large providers, their coverage is across maybe 20 different apprenticeships. And for some providers who've been in the field for a long time, their Ofsted rating could be 10 years ago. So I think you have to take it in the context of currency. How recent is the Ofsted report? And the second thing is relevance. What do you get when you drill down under it to find out about the data about the specific apprenticeship you're looking for? Because a good Ofsted rating across the board, but a very poor outcomes for maybe the digital apprenticeship that you're looking for.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it's you know, what we would expect, but I think it's one of the things that we'd be looking at, right? So Ofsted is one of many things that you would use. It's an indicator. So okay, of course you're looking for a good one, but it's not the only thing you're going to be looking for when you get to one. So I think across a range of things is something that would be very useful.
Fantastic. So this afternoon, the apprenticeship we're going to be discussing today is the Level 4 Revenue and Welfare Benefits Standard. So I'm going to do a quick recap of where this standard's come from, where we're up to with this standard, as it's a brand new one. Julie, who's not with us today, led the Trailblazer group with Cambridge City Council, and they worked together with a number of local authorities who are named on the standard documentation we'll look at later. They helped to develop the standard, and all the new standards are developed by employer-led groups, because employers know what skills, knowledge and behaviours they would like their apprentices to develop. So they're the best people to help develop these standards. The new standards do not belong to training providers. They're not ours. It's a national Level 4 standard designed by employers for employers. And you can view all the standards on the Institute for Apprenticeships website. So this slide shows you a breakdown of this new standard. You can see that knowledge, skills and behaviour are the things that they will be looking at throughout the apprenticeship journey. You've got how apprenticeships have changed in the past, so that there's a lot more focus now on knowledge, skills and behaviours, that you are sort of providing an open window. People can see them, they're viewable by parents, apprentices and businesses. All apprentices have to be fully competent in English and maths. As part of this standard, they have to achieve a Level 2 functional skill in English and maths if they haven't got that qualification already. Helps to recognise excellence and helps to ensure that all apprentices gain professional registration where applicable within their sector. It's employer driven. The employers are the people that have driven these apprenticeships forward. And for this apprenticeship, it's approximately 12 to 18 months, and all apprenticeships have to go through an endpoint assessment at the end, which is not conducted by the training provider, but by an external assessor who will look at what the apprentice has been doing and make a final decision on their competency. So funding bands. 5 things that you need to know. So employers with a paid bill in excess of 3 million will pay the levy, and the levy is 0.5% of your total annual pay bill. You can access your levy funds through the digital account, and funds will appear in the account monthly. The government will apply a 10% top-up payment. The funds will start to expire from April 2019, so next year. And currently, the apprenticeship we're looking at today is rated at funding band 10, which is £7,000. But these funding band numbers do change as the costs are looked at. So it's probably better not to look at funding band numbers, but to concentrate looking on the maximum amount for that particular funding band of that particular apprenticeship. They've changed since the last webinar. There's now 30 bands, and the price is negotiable with the provider and should be based on the needs of the individual who are involved in the programme. For example, does the learner have any prior knowledge? Have they already got some experience? What level of support is required? And what level of training will be given? The training required and its cost will vary according to the particular circumstances and the needs of the individual apprentice and employer. So employers will expect providers to offer quality and value for money, and they need to agree a price. The upper limit of each funding band caps the maximum amount of digital funds an employer who pays the levy can use towards an individual apprenticeship. The upper limit of the funding band also sets the maximum price that the government will co-invest towards an individual apprenticeship where an employer does not pay the levy or has insufficient digital funds left and they're eligible for extra government support. You might ask who actually decides which funding band these apprenticeships fit into. So the Institute of Apprenticeships makes a funding band recommendation, and that goes to the Secretary of State for Education, who takes the final decision. And the way they are calculated is it's based on the required amount of training, the sector subject area, and there's an allowance in there for the endpoint assessment. From April 2019, the funds you paid into your levy pot with the government are going to be lost a little bit by little bit, and it works out by they take these month in month. So funds you paid in May 2017 will be taken back in May 2019, etc. So it goes month by month. Some questions for the panel. How do you feel about the funding bands? Has it confused either of you how the funding bands are structured?
No, it hasn't confused me at all because I keep up to date with them. I suppose it does. I do question sometimes the dark art behind the scenes of how they get to the funding bands, and especially with the consistent reviews that we've been getting. And I'm more interested in the quality of what I'm going to get for the apprentice and the standard. The funding band simply tells me the maximum funding I can get for that. But if you also think about some apprenticeships in, for example, the airline industry, where if you want to train a pilot, it costs you £100,000, but the maximum funding band for an apprenticeship is £27,000. So there's a lot of people costed out of the market.
Thank you, that's brilliant.
I really disagree with that. I disagree with that part of the top end of the market. And sometimes there's some struggles with certain professions that are, it's difficult for them to develop standards because they can't, the banding doesn't occur, payments don't cover the training for that. So it limits the market slightly. But in the case that we're talking about today, I think it's not a problem.
Thank you, Jack. So I'm going to move on to the Select Committee report. So this report's been put together. There's some key recommendations. They found that apprentices are let down by poor quality and support. Not enough apprentices are getting high quality training, people are being disadvantaged. And there were some key recommendations made through this report. They're on the screen for you now. So these are some of the things that they are going to be putting in. All providers should receive at least a monitoring visit from Ofsted within their first year of offering apprenticeships. New providers judged by Ofsted to be making insufficient progress should be removed from the register, so they won't be able to offer apprenticeships again. Tighten up the requirements on providers who subcontract their provision. Increase the top funding band to better match the full cost delivery for some apprenticeships. And again, on the other side, there's some more recommendations that have been made. So open up the panel. Gentlemen, is there any recommendations that you think are likely to happen? Is that all of them, or some more important to you?
Do you want to start there, Jack, especially around the IAG element of it all?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think the thing with all these recommendations is they're often very useful, but they only really get carried through if there's really the political will to do those things. And it's hard, I think, sometimes for some of these things to become reality, even though we know that they'll improve things across the market.
Yeah, I mean, I think the monitoring review in the first year has been a real positive, because when you take learners into account, if it's 2 or 3 years down the line, you can make a real negative impact on young people's lives and on quality. I'm a bit unsure about whether we should remove a provider within that first year if they're not, if they get a requires a improvement type of rating, simply because I would like to think in the first year there's a supportive element to all that. But I do think that moving forward, flexibility around the off-the-job training, I really like the rule. I like the fact that we've given protected time, and I wouldn't like to see that watered down, because I think it might affect quality.
I think there's also an advantage to the employer there as well, really, because you're going to end up with apprentices who are at a better level, because you can guarantee that they've got a certain amount of off-the-job training, which is guaranteed, which overall is going to be better for the company, even though it might be for a particular line manager that they prefer the person to be working more of the time. I think overall it would be much more beneficial to the organisation.
Is there anything you think employers can do to protect themselves from partnering with a poor provider? Any recommendations, Paul, from your experience?
Well, I mean, when you're talking about procurement here, very much employers have now in the commissioning stage that they're bringing providers to come and see them. And that's a very sterile environment. Every provider I'm thinking about working with, all our meetings happen in their premises, and I'm able to see learners, I'm able to hear what's going on in the environment. And I think get out of your office, go and visit the provider, talk to learners, experience the atmosphere, and you can actually tell whether there's a positive learning environment going on there. If you bring providers to your premises to talk in a sterile room, what you're getting is what they want to tell you.
That's fantastic advice. I think recently we've heard a lot in the news about the failures of 3As and Learn Direct. Is there anything the providers could do in these situations? Is it just a case of bad luck?
Anything on that, Jack?
Well, I just wanted to say on what you mentioned before, just one other point to say about when choosing providers is it's usually pretty straightforward to find out other organisations that are working with that provider, and there's no reason you can't call up that organisation and ask them of their experiences independently of when you're talking to the provider, because you can just call up and say, hey, I understand that you've had some apprentices on this standard, how have you found it? And I think that's also a pretty good benchmark, because there's nothing better than someone's already been through that process as well.
And I mean, your apprentices themselves who are in that learning environment constantly, how much time do you actually spend with them and ask them what their experiences are when they go to sessions, what the e-learning's like? Do you have access to their VLE to have a look at it and see what the quality is? I've got in our framework agreement that contract with the provider that actually I can drop in unannounced in any training session at any location, our premises or their premises, and actually sit at the back of the room and just observe. And I think that unannounced visit is really, really important. The ownership should be with the employer rather than the provider.
How important is an Ofsted rating to you, Paul, when you're looking at providers?
Ofsted rating is one of the things that I look at. I also look at Companies House. I look at online reviews. I'm going to be interested to see where the new ESFA element comes in. But in relation to the Ofsted, as I said earlier, it's all to do with the currency. Is it in the last 2 to 3 years, or is it 10 years old because they were rated outstanding and haven't been re-reviewed? And also, so that currency, but the relevance in relation to, were they Ofsteded because they were delivering standalone qualifications? Now they're delivering apprenticeships, which is a completely different beast. Is that really relevant?
Fantastic, thank you. As a company looking through an Ofsted report, what do you pick up on? What do you concentrate your time on the most?
I mean, teaching and learning is the central element through it all. I mean, I always look at safeguarding, but to agree, I take that as a given. It's really the teaching and learning, because apprenticeships are about skills, experience, and behaviours. And so what delivers that? And part of it's the employer in the workspace. But actually, when you go along and see providers, if you see poor behaviours in the working environment of the staff that are working for that provider, is that what I'm expecting is going to be replicated in the learning experience? And even if it isn't, my apprentices who are actually visiting and learning in that environment will actually pick up. It's a bit like kids pick up from their parents bad behaviours. So I do think it's really important to look at what you're looking for, and behaviour, skills and experience.
I think it was good that you also mentioned looking at Companies House, because the financial sustainability of providers, I think, isn't looked at really in the Ofsted reports.
And I mean, if you look at the number of providers that have gone bust recently, etc. But one of the reasons I look at Companies House is because there's a marketplace going on since the RoTAP was opened up of the company name, because it's on RoTAP, kind of being sold around the country. £50,000 will buy you a training name nowadays that's on RoTAP. And actually, I came across one provider who actually emailed me, cold called me, and I had a look, and they'd been sold 4 times in 17 months, which, would I really want to work with them? Are they in it for the money? Do they have students at the heart of what to do? Do they actually know what they're doing? Or is it just, I'll go in, make some money for 12 months, and actually whether it has a positive impact on apprentices, on whether we're closed down in 12 months is irrelevant. I'll actually make a quick buck.
Fantastic. Jack, when we did the first poll, it was people were looking at quality, and I think what Paul's just said, we do look at quality. Do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think you'd expect quality to be the best, because you're investing in somebody, right? And you would like the most effective people for your workforce, whether they're going into your overall organisation or even into your own team. You're going to want the best people. So it doesn't make sense to have the main focus on price. You really want to choose the best provider for that particular standard that you possibly can, so that you end up with really rounded, really effective employees in the business. It's like a false economy to go for a very low cost option, or can be.
Okie dokie. So we're going to move on to what we look for in a training provider. So there's 6 points here. 1 is the Ofsted grade, as we've mentioned. 2 is the experience. So how long have they been going for? What experience have they got within apprenticeships? We'll look at some sort of key success figures. We'll go through those with you as well. The cultural fit, value for money and price, and there's some other considerations we've put in here as well to support you. The ESFA are going to be putting together a sort of a TripAdvisor review tool. At the moment, you can see percentages only, but there will be sort of comments in there as well that they've gathered about the providers, so that you get a better detail of what other people think about them. I think we've just discussed, haven't we, that it's nice to see what other companies say about the providers that you're working with. So this would be a really useful tool for you.
There's actually several also other sorts of rankings out there that already exist that include not totally, but in part, the training aspect. So there's one by all about school leavers, top employers, which includes training, and there's also one by Rate My Apprenticeship, which also includes training. So there are other places where you can go to get an overall sense of the organisation, and they're more recent because they're annual surveys, anonymous surveys with the people at those organisations. It's just another thing that you can use to try and benchmark how a provider is.
Thanks for that, Jack. That's brilliant. Okay, so we're going to move on to Ofsted grading. So I think as a parent, it's really important you're looking at schools. That one of the main things you look at first of all is the Ofsted grade. But it's important not just to look at the grade, but like we've just mentioned, to look at when they were last inspected. Is it up to date? And have a look at the report. So there are 4 gradings. You've got 1 outstanding, 2 good, 3 requires improvement, and 4 is inadequate. And there's a breakdown. So every provider that is seen by Ofsted, they look at overall effectiveness, effectiveness of leaders and management, quality of teaching and assessment, personal development, behaviour and welfare, and outcomes for learners. And those grades are put together at the end. You will see their overall grade. All new training providers are visited by Ofsted, a monitoring visit within the first 12 months of them delivering apprenticeships. And these monitoring visits are not graded in the same way. So when you go onto the Ofsted website, it'd be really useful when you look, if you can't see a 1 to 4 grade, that you click onto the website and you take a look at their report and read through it, because the grading will not be on there for you to see. Jack, do you think an Ofsted report is a good starting point for employers, or would you recommend they went elsewhere first? Is it to back up other things they might have looked into?
I think definitely. I think it's a good standard to start with. I mean, take into consideration the things we've spoken about earlier. It's not the only place and has to be put in context. But I think it's a great starting point, and it gives you a good overview of the organisation on the key areas that you're going to be looking at. But we shouldn't just rely on it as one, and of course we should take it in context.
Paul, would it put you off a provider if they haven't been inspected yet, if they hadn't had a monitoring visit or they haven't got a full report on the website?
No, because they could have an outstanding history of delivering, for example, digital qualifications, whether that be BTECs or other standalone, and all they've done now is moved into the apprenticeship market where they're actually going to deliver the qualification within the standard. And I think, like Jack was saying, it's a really good start point, to look at the Ofsted report, because when you talk to the provider, you also want to be informed, and you can if you've read the Ofsted report, you can question elements of that, because it also shows the provider that they need to be transparent, because you have come to the table well informed.
That's brilliant. We're just showing you on the screen now how you can find those inspection reports. So you can search by provider name, or you can type in your location postcode and it will bring back the providers in your area. And as you can see where it says rating, you'll get the rating that they've been given by Ofsted. There's a few on the screen there that haven't got a rating, so they haven't been visited by Ofsted yet. Gentlemen, what would happen if a new provider was rated as inadequate or was needing improvement from Ofsted?
I think, as I mentioned earlier on, I mean, it's about why. And if it's a large provider with a range of qualifications, and that phrase that comes into Ofsted's report is overall, they've been graded as requires improvement. But if I know the delivery that's happening to my students in a specifically curriculum area, and I see it myself as being outstanding, I wouldn't want an overall grade to impact my decision for that. So, for example, I've got 6 HEI universities, 5 colleges, and the remainder, another several independent training providers, because I go to each one for a specific apprenticeship based on the quality of how that one's delivered. So I've spread based on the quality of delivery for what I need for my staff. If
someone's graded a 3 or 4, does that mean they can still?
So if they're graded a 3, we can still work with them. If they're graded a 4 and requires improvement, that really does take some thought. And of course, at that stage, they're barred from recruiting any more apprentices until they are re-inspected. And under the ESFA rules, as a employer, if someone is regraded that, it's you've got the right to move your apprentices to another provider.
Fantastic, thank you. Jack, is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, nothing. Nothing.
Brilliant, thank you. So you can look at national achievement rates for the country. So these figures displayed on this next slide show you the national achievement rates, and this is across all apprenticeship programs, not only one in particular. This is published nationally for anyone to be able to see. It's all open. And the ESFA, the people who supply all of the funding, they send out sort of satisfaction surveys once a year. These go out to apprentices and to companies involved with the training providers, and they ask for feedback. At the moment, you can see percentages only, and this is where the new sort of TripAdvisor bit will come in. So you can see these percentages. They're recorded on the Find Apprenticeship Training website. Once you search for a provider, you'll be able to see what the percentages are showing. If you can't see a percentage on there, it's because they haven't been offering apprenticeships for the full 12 months since the surveys have been conducted, or they may not have had enough responses from the employers and learners, and they're not published if they don't get above a 70% rate coming back. How important are these figures, Jack, Paul, to either of you two?
I mean, I think you're into that quandary now of data and transparency. National achievement rates for apprenticeships means that about 40% of your apprentices can fail, and you're still above the national achievement rate, which is really disappointing. So if you get a provider and they say they're publishing and sending you out data saying they're 5% above the national achievement rate, that tells you that they're still 35% below 100. So what I'm more interested in the provider is, yet again, go back to the curriculum area. If your achievement rate nationally is 95%, that's really good overall. But if I asked you, show me your achievement rate for your level 4 digital, and that shows that you've got a 61% achievement rate, then do I really want to work with you? So you need to drill down in the data, because on the other hand, you could someone who's got a 75% overall achievement rate, but a 96% achievement rate in digital. So yet again, drill down and find out the relevance to you and the qualification or apprenticeship you're looking to engage in.
Yeah. Jack, do you think the TripAdvisor element will help with this as well, having the comments to back up the percentages?
I think the comments would help, but what would be more helpful is if you just have a wider breakdown of information. People are making decisions based on all different sorts of things, and they're looking for different things. So if we could have that information available, it would make everyone's job a little bit easier, just to collect that data and display that, because like we were just saying then, you might want to know about a particular standard rather than just overall how somebody's performing. So if it's overall and overall comments, probably not going to really add that much more level of detail than what we have. But I think if there's additional pieces of information and it can be broken down in different ways, then I think that would be very useful.
And it's like we said, it's good to speak to other people who use the same provider, isn't it, to get the ideas and how they feel about the providers you're thinking of using.
Yeah, I think so. But I think these are two different things. So I think definitely if you're looking at a particular standard, it's worthwhile if you can speak to somebody who's done that standard. And ideally not someone that's been recommended by the training provider, because they could happen to have a really great relationship with one particular organisation. So if you can do that independently, I think that's good. But I think in terms of this idea of building this TripAdvisor style rating to give people more information.
Oh, seems to have lost Jack there for a minute. We'll come back to you, Jack, in a minute if we can get you back. Thank you. So we've talked a little about checking experience. So as in any service area, experience counts for a lot. So questions you might want to be asking training providers are things like, how long have they been in the apprenticeship business? Does the provider employ apprentices for their own business? Lots of providers will actually employ their own apprentices, so it'd be good to speak to them about their experiences with them. What experience do they have in providing training for your particular business sector? Have they worked with your sector before? And what experience do the trainers have? You can ask to see the trainers' CVs, more information. You can go and meet the trainers. I think, like you said, Paul, go and see the trainers in the academies.
See them actually delivering, yeah.
That's fantastic. So, thank you. And we've got determine the cultural fit. So working with any training provider is a massive commitment, and you must be able to work as a partnership to support your apprentices. So if, hand on heart, your business has dislike of paperwork and an aversion to deadlines, can your apprenticeship supply cope with this? Can they step in to support you? It might be if formal project management, policies, audits, those kind of things are integral to your company's way of doing things. Can the provider comply with this? Spending time with potential suppliers to reassure yourself they're a good synergy. Your employee's development really depends on it, and you need that partnership. Paul, with your experience, have you got any examples of cultural fit? Have you?
Yes, I mean, one of the providers we work with is actually a social enterprise, and they're less than a mile from where we are. They're about engaging with young people, using different type of work-based programs to get them ready for apprenticeships, and then they're also supporting and delivery in apprenticeships, and their corporate social responsibility and ours is completely aligned. And in addition to that, in closed cohorts that are just our staff and we've got a provider that's working with us, we engage with them and we give them our vision, our values, our behaviors, etc. And actually we get those fed into all the different elements of the program, so that they're not just delivering generic information, they're actually building on our own culture and ethos.
Is it easy enough to sort of ensure a cultural fit through the written procurement exercise, or is this a sit and speak to the providers and, like you said, give them information about yourselves?
I don't think the procurement exercise achieves it on the paperwork side, simply because you can put anything on a piece of paper and you can say, I'll do this, that, or the other. What it is really, it's about building a relationship and trust up with the provider, having that single point of contact and going along and actually see that they walk the talk. So as part of that procurement process, where you normally will have a written element, you'll have them given a central presentation, you need a third element of actually going to the organization. So that might get you down to a short list of 3, but you need to go and visit them and interact with them and build a relationship, because you're putting a lot of value, both financial and quality, into this decision.
So would you recommend, as well as going out to see them, that you get you shortlisted, they come in to visit you as well and do that stand up?
Yes, and because it's when we get providers in, we use voting technology. And we can have up to 100 people in the room, and those people are judging based on not just the quality of the presentation and the focus, but actually even on the ethos of the organization and how they're looking to support our values and objectives, because the learner is going to get skills, experience, and behaviors, and in a lot of cases a nationally recognized qualification. What the organization wants to get out of it is the reinforcement of our culture, and actually how your delivery methodology and the content is going to support innovation, service improvement and quality.
That's brilliant. Thank you for that. Value for money, eh? Value for money. Some employers weight their apprenticeship tenders on quality, whereas some are focused more on price, anything up to 60% on some occasions. You should expect to receive a high quality service from your training provider. That's what they're there for, and this will come at a price. However, it is essential that you do get value for money. We believe that you often get what you pay for. High quality training might very well be expensive.
Yes.
It's important to check what training you get and what's included and what's not included, how many training days you get across the length of the apprenticeship, how many of these are sort of face-to-face in a classroom environment, whether they're in your building speaking to your apprentices, whether they are at an academy being taught, how much support is provided, what do you get from your training provider for your money. What are the main pitfalls, Paul, around value, what employers could easily fall into, things they should be looking for to make sure they're getting value for money?
Well, I mean, the first thing is that I'm wary of a training provider who phones me up or wants to talk to me, and the first conversation they want to have is, yo, the funding cap's 7,000, but we can deliver this for 5,000 for you. Well, I'm not actually interested. We don't have funding as a scoring requirement for our procurement at all. We go through a procurement process, we focus on quality, delivery, content, methodology. We actually ask for some additional elements to go in. So if you think of I'm from the NHS, so a health apprenticeship, we ask them under the communication element to include British Sign Language, which gives us added value. When we get to the stage where you're the provider we want to work with, and I say want to, then we'll talk about cost. And if I'm going to give you 100 learners over 2 years, you know, when you think of economy of scale, what does that then bring to the cost? So that's the last thing I talk about.
That's brilliant. Fantastic. So on this slide, there's an image displayed there for you, an interesting quote from the Select Committee, and it also relates to our poll results at the start of the webinar about carefully considering the percentage split between price and quality factors when developing your tender. Paul, anything you want to say about the image on the screen?
You know, I think it definitely is. We need to consider both price and quality, but I think the image is wrong, because actually it should be weighted on quality, because it says there price and value, so really it should be price and quality, and the quality should be 90% of the negotiation. 10% should be then on price, because if the quality's wrong and you're paying 50% of what the funding cap is, all you've done is wasted £3,500 against the £7,000 funding cap and got a real poor quality experience for the learner. And if they're going to work in your organisation and they're badly trained, you've achieved nothing.
What kind of quality factors would you look for with a provider? Is it the amount of training, the quality of the trainers, the amount of time they come and spend with you in the organisation?
It's really about the outcomes for the learner. What are the skills you're going to give the learner? And more the part in partnership with me, because I need to own this. So what we work in a partnership with our providers is, what do you want me to do in the workplace? So I'm going to provide them these skills. I will give them tasks to do at the exact same time as you're delivering theory elements in the classroom, so it reinforces it. And then when you're doing assessments, you can actually see that value. So it has to be a key partnership.
Fantastic. So there's a few other considerations on here. We've got sustainability and viability of the apprenticeship programme. We've got other quality marks and accreditations, e.g. matrix. So people that are delivering high quality information, advice and guidance, they may very well have matrix quality marks and other quality marks. Check for the ESFA notices of concerns registers, that's to do with the funding. And provider readiness. If they're a new provider, are they ready to deliver this apprenticeship to your apprentices? Anything else Paul, on there that you'd like to add to, or things
Well,
that you might look for?
Well, I suppose matrix is a really interesting one, and if you're looking from a college or HEI perspective, etc., you can be very useful. As an employer, I'm giving my staff apprenticeship qualifications for two reasons. I'm either upskilling them to give them a promotion, and actually the IAG is mine to own because it's job role related rather than qualification related. And in relation to recruiting young apprentices, it's into a career pathway. So I think matrix is useful for where it sits, but from an employer perspective, that IAG advice maybe isn't as relevant to me as it should be. But I would definitely look of anything that the SFA or Ofsted have said, and like you say, areas of concern, intervention reports, but any information you can get your hands on. And even if you just Google and then hit the news button, it's surprising what you can see about news articles come up, because some providers, especially if they're national or that there, but there's a lot of free information about, and not that it should be taken for granted, but it gives you a point that you can discuss with those providers about, well, can you just clarify what's going on?
Would you look at, we know that the training providers are provided training, and then at the end of the apprenticeship programme, they go to an endpoint assessor who is a different organisation. Would you check to see if there's an endpoint assessment organisation already involved with that provider for that particular apprenticeship?
Best practice would be that there is credible endpoint assessment organisations approved from you start your apprenticeship, especially if it's at a level 2 and you've only got 12 months. However, I do take at risk enrolling students or staff on apprenticeship qualifications without an endpoint assessment, because if my focus initially is about skills, experience and behaviours, the staff can get those. The endpoint assessment's about getting the IFA certificate. To a great degree, the IFA certificate has not got the gravitas at this moment in time due to longevity, etc., that maybe the IFA would hope it had, because the learner's going to get the nationally recognised qualification before it gets the IFA one. So I will enrol people without an endpoint assessment organisation, because there are other quality and qualification marks that I can achieve along the way. But I still want them to be able to achieve that endpoint assessment to get the full apprenticeship.
And would you look at the lead time for the learners enrolling? Do you want a provider that's going to take them as and when you need to? Do you look at them going into cohorts? Does the lead time affect you in any way?
It does, but I also take into consideration the provider, because it has to be a partnership, and to dictate to the provider that you will start cohorts or you will start my providers on certain dates isn't a partnership. So we have to be respectful to each other. So we have an agreement about lead-in times. We have an agreement about effective size of cohorts. I work in partnership with my providers in actually talking to other employers about creating effective cohorts, because it has to be cost effective for you. And if it's cost effective for you, I am getting the product I need when I need it.
Fantastic, thank you.
The other thing I'd add on that is, in terms of other considerations, is to also make sure that you keep open the communication within
So we're near the end of this now. We're going to have a quick look at some questions and answers. So Paul, I'm going to go back to you again. We seem to have not been able to get chat back, but if you give employers one piece of advice when procuring an apprenticeship provider, what would it be? Just the one.
Go and spend as much time as possible in the provider's location and talk to the students that are there. Don't be chaperoned into saying, come and let me talk. Just take that free walk around and talk to people. For example, I'm sitting here today, and actually I've spoken to a couple of the students here that are on courses today. I've had a look around the building, and I've heard the atmosphere of the staff. So actually I've gone away with an impression here today just for coming and participating in this webinar.
Brilliant, thank you.
And it's a positive one, by the way, Emma, just for your
Oh,
information.
fantastic. Thank you, Paul. We haven't got any of the questions that are appearing at the moment. I'm just going to double check on questions. If you've got any questions, you'd like to enter them into the question panel now. Jack's sent through an additional piece of advice that he would give to keep the communications open within the business to see how people are getting on. That's, yeah, fantastic piece of advice, isn't it?
Yes.
Especially working with larger teams. That's brilliant. Thank you for that, Jack. So there's no further questions that have appeared. No. Okay, so I'd like to take time now to say thank you to the expert panel and to everyone out there who's been listening to us this afternoon. We are very happy to talk through next steps with you on a one-to-one basis. So if you're an individual or regional basis, please get in touch with us and we will organise somebody to come and speak to you.
Or for them to come and speak to you.
Fantastic. We'd love to see you. The slides, as I've explained, are on the right-hand side of the panel. You can download them. The webinar recording will be sent out following this webinar for you all. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us this afternoon. So we have got a selection of exit questions. They are there so that we can gauge the effectiveness of our webinar programme and get some feedback before our next webinar. So there's a few quick questions if you wouldn't mind taking the time to do that for us. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Jack.
Pleasure.
Thank you.